The Old Testament, you have several passages that actually talk about in this exact valley is where they sacrificed their children.
Oof. When we're talking about death, there's usually kind of two camps that people fall into. You either have this camp where people don't want to talk about death. They're either afraid of it. It's kind of this thing that you just don't talk about. Or there's this over fascination with death. And almost this...
Zombies.
Right. Almost this like creepily lustful desire to talk about death. And you see that in zombies and movies and all sorts of different stuff. But really there's this oversimplification of talking about the afterlife or talking about heaven and hell. And really what we want to do is to kind of talk about this in a biblical way. And so the resurrection of the dead is the resurrection of all the dead.
Right. Yeah, it's easier just to say, okay, when you die, you either go to heaven or you die and you go to hell. But the Bible actually has a lot more going on. It's not that simple.
Right.
And so, for example, we'll look at here is that when somebody's wicked and evil and they don't love and know God, they die, but then they're resurrected and they die again. Oof. So you die twice. You don't want to die twice.
You don't want to die twice.
So let's look at the passage here. I'm in Revelation 20, verse 14. It says this. We're at the end of the book here. This is final judgment. It says, then death and Hades, or Sheol, were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. And if anyone was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. So here we have the second death, where death itself and Hades are thrown into the lake of fire. So this is not good.
Bad news.
For the wicked and the unrighteous.
Right. Okay, so what about hell? What's the difference between hell and Hades?
Right, we don't even see hell in this passage, do we?
No.
So what's going on here if you die and you go to hell? So now we have to really jump into it a little bit. So hell in the New Testament is a translation of Gehenna. Okay? So Gehenna is really, it's referring to a physical location. So it's called the Valley of Hinnom. So just south of the old city of Jerusalem, you have this valley.
Right.
And this valley was where they would burn their trash. So it's associated with fire. And it's also this symbolic of burning, therefore.
Right.
And in the Old Testament, you have several passages that actually talk about in this exact valley is where they sacrificed their children to Baal. Okay? So this is where child sacrifice historically took place, was in Gehenna. All right? So you could see why Gehenna has this symbolic connection to hell or final judgment or fiery judgment, destruction, right? You can see where this connection came from and why when we think of hell today, yeah, that is what we think about.
But so is hell the same as Hades then?
So, well, that's a good question. So before we jump into that, let's look first at what Yeshua says, because I think this will help us kind of tease out what Gehenna really means, and you can see it in the text. So if we turn to Matthew 10:28, and do not fear, this is Yeshua talking, do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Instead, fear the one who is able to destroy both soul and body in Gehenna.
Wow.
So again, Yeshua actually talks about Gehenna, which some Bibles it'll translate it hell there, quite a few times. But like you're saying, hell isn't necessarily Hades.
Right, right.
So what is Hades then?
Yeah, it gets a little confusing there. Yeah.
So Hades is the grave.
Okay.
Hades is the abode of the dead. It holds the dead. So it's not a good place in that sense. It's dark, and even in Greek mythology, Hades is one of these characters of death.
Right.
And so it's this characterization of the grave. And in the Old Testament, you have a similar word called Sheol. So you might have heard that word as well.
Right.
So Sheol and Hades are referring to the same thing. But then hell is different than Hades and Sheol. So what is hell then, Sam?
Well, I mean, let's just put it bottom line. It's a place you don't want to go.
Yeah, you don't want to go to hell.
You don't want to go to hell, Hades, Sheol, any of those things. That's the no-go zone.
Right. Post-resurrection, the saints, the people who love God, they go to heaven.
Right.
Okay. But everyone else goes to Hades. They go to Sheol.
Yeah.
And so then we see at the end of the book, okay, this passage we just read, I'll read it again, back to Revelation 20. It says, then death and Sheol were thrown into the lake of fire. So if people go to hell, which it seems like that hell is where Hades is.
Right.
Okay. But then Hades is thrown into the lake of fire. Or you could say hell is thrown into the lake of fire at the end. So, because if we have a second death, so even if somebody goes to hell now, there's a second death. They get thrown into the lake of fire. So if hell is fire now, then there's some sort of other fire that they're resurrected from hell unto this judgment in the lake of fire.
Right. Right.
So again, you don't want to die twice.
Yeah, bottom line.
You don't want to go to Gehenna. You don't want to be resurrected in order to have this death by fire.
Yeah.
This destruction by fire, this eternal death.